Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining this meeting. I'm going to talk about how jobs for all by 2025, which India always has had as a goal, could become even more something that India can do because of COVID. Now, as I talk, I will keep my remarks brief, and it is a very complex subject, so I'm sure you'll have questions. You can type them in the chat, and after I finish my opening remarks, then we'll have a moderated question and answer session where I will try and handle as many of the questions as I can. So let's get started. So the normal thing is that COVID is going to send the world into a recession, and it's going to be more digital. So all these are negative for jobs. So why is it that I'm saying that COVID could actually be an opportunity for India and could help India get jobs for all by 2025? So the first thing is that with COVID, there is going to be a lot of disruption in the world. And India can figure out how to take advantage of that disruption and use that to create jobs. So that is one thing that we will explore. The second thing is that in the short run, COVID could be extremely negative for India. I hope that doesn't happen, but it's a possibility that cannot be discounted. So you may have a situation in India like in 1989, 1990, where to get out of the crisis, India had to reform in 1991, and those reforms propelled the Indian economy. So some say India works best in a crisis. So I hope it doesn't get to a crisis. But to borrow a phrase from George Bush, we will need shock and awe type of reforms if we are going to seize this opportunity. So with that said, let's dive right in. So we're going to start with a quote from a legendary investor, Ray Dalio. So he puts this into perspective, saying that among all the various countries in the world, which country should I invest in? So one of the things that he asks is there a country with a high degree of inefficiencies? And are they disposing those inefficiencies off? So as we all know, most of us, at least who look at it from a global lens, that India has a very, very high degree of inefficiencies still. And it can, if it wants, with shock and awe reforms, dispose them off. So from that aspect on Dalio's checklist, that boxes can be ticked. The second thing that he talks about is that a well-educated, intelligent labor force that could work for cheap. Now, India has a very large labor pool. They could work for cheap, meaning say a stipend of rupees 7,000 per month. Now, are they motivated? Are they productive? Are they well-educated? That is a little bit of a question mark, but that is, again, something that can be easily fixed. And the last point that Dalio makes is that they were prevented from working on things that the world needs because of a relatively closed door policy, which really refers to the ease of doing business and so on and so forth. So again, we know that India has improved on ease of doing business, but it's still not the #1 country in ease of doing business. So again, all these things can be fixed if we go and do some shock and awe type of reforms. And then India will become the best investment destination in the world, and a lot of private investment will rush in. So first of all, let's ask ourselves, why do we need private investment? So if we look at any country, especially India, where there are limited resources, and we look at India's experience with telecom, then India could have tried to do telecom reforms itself, or take advantage of the telecom opportunity through BSNL and MTNL. Then it would have pumped in a lot of government money. And probably the outcomes would have been much worse than they are now, because the government has, as most governments do, has very limited execution capability. So first the government invests a lot and then it divests. So now that seems to be a really odd system. So, so clearly, while some people may dispute this, I think the majority agree that a country like India should get a lot of private investment. Now, how much private investment? So I looked at China, which in 2005 was somewhat comparable to where India is today. And then it grew rapidly, it created a lot of jobs, and it attracted $75 billion of FDI on the average between 2005 2007. So India needs about $100 billion of private investment, because in China also there must have been some domestic investment. So now do not worry whether this number 100 billion is correct, or should be 110, or it should be 75, or whatever. In terms of orders of magnitude, if you agree that India needs a lot of private investment, then we are on the same page. So recently, Facebook invested $5 billion, which is wonderful, because it's showing that a company like Facebook has faith in India and has invested a large sum of money. But as we can see, that now I'm sure there is other investment other than Facebook, which has come in, but we are still pretty far from the $100 billion that we need annually. So let's move on now to see how we can look at a framework for jobs for all by 2025. Now, I'm going to start in this framework by talking about manufacturing entry-level jobs. Now, I've just used manufacturing as an example. There could be entry-level jobs in any sector. And we need a lot of youth to get entry-level jobs. So today what is happening is that almost 80% of the youth, or maybe even a higher number, are not academically gifted. So they end up wasting 6 years of their lives after 10th, okay, to kind of go to complete 12th and then go to 4-year college. Now, instead of that, if they were working on something that the world wants, so they had sustainable jobs, and they were earning a stipend of, let's say, 7,000 rupees per month, whether they were boys or girls. Now, that could hugely boost the GDP of households and ultimately the GDP of the country. So what do we need to create a very, very large number of entry-level jobs? And let's start with manufacturing. So the first thing that we need is disruption in the world, which makes people want to come to places like India and move away from places like China. So that COVID has provided. Even before COVID, there was the trade wars between US and China, and there was some movement of supply chains from China to other countries. But if you look at data, at least in textiles, most of that disruption did not come to India, but went to countries like Bangladesh and Vietnam. So looking at this kind of reality, then we have to see why. So another check box has been ticked with low taxes for manufacturing units. So now if we make sure that our youth can get basic life skills. By basic life skills, I mean that they can read and speak one language. It need not be English, but fluently. And then they have self-belief that they can become prosperous, so they're highly motivated. They know their rights and duties. They have basic digital literacy, basic financial literacy, basic health literacy, and they get like a life skills certificate. Then you could have a very, very large, cheap, motivated product labor pool, which is one more box ticked. But that's not enough, right? Because if India is not number one in terms of ease of doing business, so if you decide to come to India and then it takes you very long to acquire land, to get your factory going, to get all your permissions, and then once you got going, regulations change, people harass you, etc., etc., then that's not going to be very good. So if we could create plug and play internet enabled factories, and this was done as far back as I think the 1970s, where, for instance, the Santa Cruz Electronic Export Processing Zone, known as SEEPS, was set up. And that propelled software in India, right? So we all know that we have parks and clusters and so on and so forth, but we all know that they don't work very efficiently. So if you could really have world-class plug-and-play internet-enabled factories, okay, with, say, common treatment of environmental things, with enough electricity, water, good logistics, hostels for the youth, which has recreation, food, and distance learning, then you've got a platform which is like unbeatable. There will be almost no country in the world which can beat this. So, and especially with the volume and scale that India can provide. So, this is the first thing that I wanted to talk about. The second thing is to try and create an enabling ecosystem for disruptors. Now, these disruptors could be in any field. I'm going to talk about an example in financial services, but this could be there could be disruptors in trying to build an election platform, a municipal services platform, whatever, right? So first, let me start with the PayPal story. So I was on the founding team of PayPal, and you may find the story very interesting. So when PayPal, initially it was a company called X.com, launched, then within a week, the Federal Reserve reached out through its vice chairman to Elon Musk, and I attended that meeting. And basically, in the meeting, though it was off the record, the vice chair, Roger Ferguson, said that X.com should remember that it has a friend in Washington, because it was trying to do something disruptive, which the Federal Reserve had been trying to get banks and Visa and MasterCard to do for 20 years. And they were saying it's not possible. So in the national interest and in the global interest, the Federal Reserve wanted to encourage the companies like X.com. So this friend in Washington, what did they do? It allowed companies like PayPal to operate without a license for 2 years. Later, PayPal was licensed in 48 states as a money transmitter, which was a very expensive and time-consuming process, which it did just before its IPO. So if it had to do this in the beginning, then PayPal would never have been born. Now, as PayPal continued on its journey and started growing big, then the banks, Visa, MasterCard, complained to the regulators and said, look, this company is not being regulated and we are being regulated. So it's not a level playing field. So what are you doing? So the regulators said, look, we know our job. This company poses no systemic risk. It's doing something which is good. So don't complain, compete. Now, what are the lessons from this story for India should India choose to adopt it? So the first thing is that X.com did not go to the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve went to X.com. So if there are things, national challenges that India wants to address, then it has to go proactively and enable regulators, create a feeling among innovators and so on and so forth, that they will really help in terms of getting the innovations off the ground for companies that can solve national challenges. So that's one. And the second thing is that once disruptors get moving, then they are going to hurt existing interests. right? And those interests will lobby the regulators, the courts, the governments to try and block the disruptor. Now, at that point in time, if the courts, the regulators, the ministers, and all side with the vested interests, then it'll affect the disruptor's business model and make India less attractive for disruptors. So this is the second lesson, because in the US, when the banks, etc., complained about PayPal, they were told, don't complain, compete. So these are the two sort of lessons that India could think about. Now let's take one very, very disruptive idea, which could possibly end poverty and create a lot of jobs in India. And you will say that, wow, how is this possible? But that's the thing, that when there are disruptive ideas, they look almost impossible in the beginning. So the idea I want to talk about is 6% unsecured profitable loans to first-time borrowers. Now, those of you who are in the finance field or even others will feel, how is this possible? You know, when you try to get an unsecured loan, even if you have a good credit history, okay, you can't get it at anything probably less than 14, 15%, maybe 12 if you're lucky, you have a great credit score, a great relationship or something. So how can 6% loans be profitable? And how can they be rolled out in a huge, massive way and help create jobs for all? And this. So, you know, this is something that I have worked on. And I do have some credibility because I was like one of the people who thought about the idea of PayPal. And initially, you know, there were almost everybody was skeptical, and then it became real. Now, this particular idea, it could be $100 billion plus idea, but it may also fizzle out. But what the regulators need to do is they need to examine it. And if it looks like it's good, then they need to encourage it. So there are already neobanks, both in India and in the world, and companies like Navi, which Sachin Bansal has set up using his money from Flipkart. Now, can these people be encouraged? And can ideas like the one that I'm talking about help and change India in a major way, right? So these are some of the shock and awe type of reforms that I'm talking about. Then let's move on to this pan-India jobs for all project management units. Now, if we say that we want jobs for all in India, then it makes sense to have at least in every state, every union territory, and at the Prime Minister's office, a project management unit which is 100% focused on jobs for all. So if this unit has, say, 2 to 8 people from top-notch consulting firms, and then it has like senior fellows in every Lok Sabha constituency and junior fellows in every MLA constituency, and all these people are focused on trying to solve this problem, right? Then the cost of this PMU in every state will probably be much less than 100 crores. Even a large state will have less than 100 crores of cost. So the overall cost of these PMUs will not be very much. And if the chief ministers, prime ministers, and the lieutenant governors make this a priority to work with these project management units and remove roadblocks, motivate them, fire them if they're not delivering, then you will have a lot of focus on how this problem can be solved. And these units will, I think, soon recognize that a key to doing this is to, one, look at models like Amul in Anand and Nestle in Moga, where these people went and transformed the districts. So could you have transformational anchors in some of the districts which can transform those particular districts? So for instance, the district of Dhar in Madhya Pradesh, which has the Mandu Fort, could this district be transformed by, say, a company like Disney, and maybe in partnership with some Indian companies, and they could transform that whole district to become like a tourism hub and create a huge number of employment opportunities, because the Dhar district has Mandu Fort, which is an amazing place. And otherwise, it's one of the poorest districts in Madhya Pradesh. So one has to think about what is the competitive advantage of each district, and then how can you create jobs for each family. Similarly, you could look at various industries, like so for instance, could textiles, can India increase its global market share in say auto parts manufacturing or whatever? Can it increase its global market share? So the last thing that I want to talk about is a jobs for all 25 platform, which basically creates pressure on the bureaucrats, the judiciary, the regulators, and politicians, okay, to deliver jobs for all. And there's a single point demand. Now, everyone who joins this platform, uh, this platform can become a huge vote bank and a very positive movement, and basically ensure that jobs for all cannot be disregarded. So finally, the last two slides, and uh, one of the most important slides. That is, what can you do? So if you are an Indian or a friend of India, you probably fit into one of these three buckets. So either you're a bureaucrat, regulator, judiciary, or a politician. So there you've got to think about shock and awe reforms and creating an enabling ecosystem. Or you could be a youth. Now I've used the word youth very broadly because you could be very old, but you could be young at heart, and then we classify you as a youth. But the youth could build a platform, like the Bitcoin platform. It was built. These days, it doesn't take very much to build a platform. You don't even have to have full-time people. If they're motivated and passionate, then things like Bitcoin, things like Wikipedia get built because it's fun. So this youth platform can be built, and it would be terrible if the youth did rail roko, rasta roko, or burned public property because they weren't getting jobs. But if they could apply digital pressure, okay, through this platform, and get a response, then it will hopefully never come to a situation where the youth have to resort to violence to get their demands for jobs met. So this is a thing that the youth can do. Then finally, if you're an investor, now you could be a small investor investing in the stock market, or you could be a very large investor who wants to put in money into India and use India as a lab for solutions for the world. Some of the media companies, the cloud computing companies, and so on so forth could think of how they can, basically catalyze the youth platform. So how can they give wide publicity to the youth platform? How can they give them free sort of cloud computing resources and things like that? So they could do that. The investors could also lobby the BRJP directly. So if you look at this, and also if you are an investor in the stock market, now let's say you, one of the things that India did was raise property taxes because it wanted to make its cities better. Now, the automatic thing would be to revolt against this. Like saying, how can we, but India has some of the lowest property taxes in the world. They're so low that it's probably impossible for Indian cities to be good. So one short-term view would be, hey, you can't raise property taxes. But a longer-term view would be that if India actually develops, then, and you had some investments in the stock market, then your investments in the stock market will go up so much that the increase in property taxes will not be something that you need to worry about. So I'm just trying to see that how everyone can think big and help in India's growing. And that may have to come with some sacrifices because there is no free lunch. So finally, my last slide is about getting involved. So if you want to learn more, then you can go to this page, and in the download section, you can learn more about, say, our ideas. My wife Anita and me have worked on this, on ending poverty by 2024. Just a 7-page PDF. And then there is a 2-pager PDF on universal prosperity, which not only talks about jobs for all by 25, but also about a new social contract. Now, this 2-pager has links to a lot of detail. So you can go as deep as you want and get some flavor of what our thinking is. Now, we're not saying our thinking is correct. Okay, but there may be something which is useful, and then it could be a starting point for people to build on. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Anita to moderate the Q&A section. Over to you, Anita.